This video goes along with your classwork number 1 assignment, which has 4 different sections, a total of 40 problems, but I'm going to be doing 12 of the problems with you today just to review some of our basic algebra skills. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing we want to do is review the idea of combining like terms. Combining like terms just means taking terms that have like things and combining them. So if a term has a variable with it, we're going to combine it with something else that has a variable. If it does not have a variable, just a number by itself, then we definitely want to combine those together. So again, remembering our rules of operation, our order of operation rules, this P in PEMDAS stands for parentheses. We have a 3, actually this is a -3 outside of this parentheses that we want to distribute to both the n and the -8. A lot of students forget to distribute the outside number to the second term in there, so be careful about that. Combining the -3 with the n is going to give us -3n, and then we have -3 times -8, which is a positive 24. And don't forget that this number here is also part of this problem, so we want to make sure that we combine things that are alike, and this is the only term that has a variable with it. So I'm going to take my positive 4 here and my positive 24 that both do not have a variable, combine those together. So my final answer here is going to be -3n, which is the only term with the n, and that's plus 28 because 24 plus 4 is 28. Let's get used to writing the term with the variable first. Okay, I have my variable term before the term without the variable. All right, and then let's go ahead and move on to number 3. I'm going to do numbers 1, 3, and 5 in this section, and then I'm going to ask you to finish up these problems. All right, and here we have something that's not going to need to be distributed, so I'm just going to write that down now. And then I have to take the 5 and distribute it to both parts of that binomial. A binomial just means an expression with 2 terms in it. So 1 plus 5m is the binomial that I'm referring to. So 5 times 1 is 5, and 5 times 5m is 25m. All right, now I can see that I have 2 terms with a variable. This term here has a variable. This term here has a variable. And 25 and -4 is what we're looking at here. So that's going to end up being 21m. 25 minus 4 is 21. And then my term without a variable goes next. So here's my final answer. And it would be good to somehow indicate what your final answer is on the page. Notice that I'm putting a box around mine. You could circle it. I'm also putting a little check mark. But please be neat in your work so that I can see all the details that you're showing me. Okay, so now in this next problem we have a 3 outside the parentheses. We have this -m that is outside the parentheses that we're just going to leave as -m. We're not going to do anything else or any distribution with that. 3 times 3m and 3 times -2. Remember, you always have to remember this second term. Don't skip that step. 9m, because I have 3 times 3 and that one has an m with it, and 3 times -2 is -6. So now I'm just going to pick out the terms that I can combine. Here's a 9m and a -m. So I end up with 8m minus 6. And that's what we mean by combining like terms and simplifying these expressions. So I would like you to finish the rest of those problems in that section, and then we're going to, in this video here, just continue on with the next section. You feel free to stop the video at any time, review, rewind what you need to rewind, and that's the benefit of watching a video, especially if you're not in class when we're going over this. In the future, you're going to be watching the videos at home by yourself and then coming to class and getting the assignment. But this first time, I thought it would be helpful to watch it in class together. So these are asking us to evaluate the values. Using the values, be careful to follow the order of operations rules. So make sure that you're following parentheses first, and then exponents, and then multiplication and division, and adding and subtracting. I just want to point out that when we're doing the multiplication and division part, you have to work left to right. Okay, that's really important. Don't just work however you'd like to, but it does have to work left to right. Now, in this first problem, 6nm, we're going to have to replace the m with a 5. We're going to have to replace the n with a 2. So really this is going to be 6, and then 2, and then 5. And what we mean here is to multiply. So there's a couple different ways we could write that. We could have the little asterisks in between here, right, to show us that we're multiplying. You don't have to have any symbols actually. You could just write 6.5.2 or whatever. But multiplication you can do out of any order. So let's just go 6 times 2 is 12 times 5. So 12 times 5, if you look on your calculator, or if you're using a calculator, that's going to be 60. Next we have x equals 4 and y equals 3. Now we need to substitute this in every time we see an x. So this x and this x are both going to be a 4. All right, notice there's this symbol here, this plus sign. And then the 3 is going to replace the y. And here we have this symbol. So we want to make sure that we're using that negative sign there. Now 4 plus 4 is 8 minus 3. And so our final answer for this one is simply just 5. Well, I guess I should have circled this as my final answer. All right, so moving on to number 15, it looks like we have another distribution problem. Now, instead of distributing first, I'm going to go ahead and replace this a with a 1 and replace this b with a 6. So now I'm going to have 6 times 6 plus 1. Now in our order of operations rules, we see that we have to do our parentheses first. So really if I do that first, if I take the parentheses part and do that, I'm going to end up with 6 times 7 because 6 plus 1 is 7. And then we have our final answer, which is 42. All right, go ahead and turn your paper over. We're going to continue on here solving each equation. There are variables in all of these problems on the back. And in the first 10 problems, we're just going to have one step in order to solve these. But then when you get to that last section, there's going to be a couple of steps. So one reminder about work with denominators here. To get something out of a denominator, we can multiply both sides by the denominator. Okay, so here I'm going to multiply the right side by 11, and I'm also going to multiply the left side by 11, which basically just lets me cancel 11 over 11. Okay, so now I'm just going to be left with a b on the left side, and 25 times 11 is 275. And we can always check this work, right? If we take our calculators out and do 275, that's what b is. If I replace 275, divide by 11, I should end up with 25. So I can always check to see if my answer is correct. Moving on to number 23, if I divide both sides by 16, I'm going to get x by itself, which is always the goal, is to get the variable by itself, then you know you're done with your work. I can cancel the 16 over 16. That does leave just the x there on the right. And if I take my calculator, 368 divided by 16 is 23. Now, how can I check this one? I can take 16, multiply it by 23, and I should get 368. And that just checks to, make sure that my answer is correct. All right, let's do one more in this section. I have, to get my terms that don't have a variable, I want to combine these. Now, in order to combine them, I'm just going to go ahead and cancel. Basically, this cancels the negative 26. If I add 26 here, this becomes a 0. And if I do that to the right side, I also have to do it to the left side. So what we have here is a number with a negative sign that is larger than the number with the positive sign. So this is going to leave us a negative 20 over here. We're keeping the sign of the larger number. This x is still valid. And we have then x equals negative 20. If I was to replace x here, if I was to replace x and put it in here, negative 20, I can check and see that negative 20 plus negative 26 ends up being negative 46. So that's just verifying that my work is correct. Okay, I need you to finish the problems in this section that I did not go over. Make sure you ask questions if you get stuck on one. And then we're going to do numbers 31, 35, 31, 33, and 35. Now, in this section, let's notice that it tells us right here that there are 2 steps. Okay, so we're looking for 2 steps to be able to solve the problem. This goes a little bit deeper into the algebra that you were taught last year. So first of all, we have a term that has no variable, another term that has no variable that we want to combine. In order to combine that and leave the x, the 2x term here, I can subtract 1 from both sides. I'm always looking for a way to get rid of something, and you always want to do the opposite operation than what is shown there. So since this was a plus 1, I'm going to use negative 1 to get that to be 0. I'm just going to keep my 2x, and now I have a negative 9 and a negative 1 on the right, so that ends up being negative 10. So this was step 1. This is what we mean by 2 steps. Okay, the first step was adding negative 1 to both sides. The next step is going to be dividing both sides by 2. Why do I want to do that? Because I want x by itself. And remember, when we divide by the number next to the x, we are able to keep the x but get rid of the 2. So this is our second step, dividing by 2. And my final answer then, because I have an x on the left, that's going to stay, and negative 10 divided by 2 is negative 5. Now if I put that back in to check my work, I can see, let me just do this in black. So 2 times negative 5 when I replace the x plus 1 equals negative 9. All right, and if that's true, then you know your answer is correct. So again, we're looking for 2 steps in number 33. It looks like we have 2 terms with no variable. The variable in the middle there has an n at the top of the fraction. So in order to get this gone from the left side, I'm going to go ahead and add 4. That cancels this term. Okay, so again, this was our first step, adding 4 to both sides. Now I'm left with n over 3 equals negative 2. Okay, if you notice here, negative 6 is bigger. The 6 itself is bigger. The negative then stays with our answer. All right, now here's step number 2 is to multiply both sides by 3, because remember the number in the denominator is what we're using so that we can cancel that. 3 over 3 is just 1, so this is step number 2, multiplying by 3. And I have an n on the left, this one here. And negative 2 times negative 3 is negative 6. And if you wanted to, you could plug that back in there and verify, of course, that your answer is correct. All right, finally we have this problem here. It looks simple, but don't get yourself mixed up. We have 2 terms here with no variable. If I want to get this positive 3 over, well, canceled, I'm going to have to do a negative 3 on both sides, right? This is my first step. Step 1 is subtracting 3 from both sides. So that leaves me with a negative a, remember that negative sign, equals negative 7. Now this is our second step, a little bit different here. Step 2, because we have a negative sign on both sides, I want to go ahead and multiply both sides by a negative 1. Some students or some teachers teach that you can divide both sides by negative 1, which is also true. So you can multiply or divide both sides by negative 1 just to cancel out those negative signs. So our final answer here is going to be A, because the 2 negative signs cancel, equals 7. Okay, once again, when you multiply 2 negatives, it becomes a positive. And if you wanted to check, you could send that 7 back in for that A, and you would find out that your answer is correct. Please make sure you rewind the video as you need to, and also ask questions if there were anything that didn't make sense or you need a little bit more attention on. Be happy to help you out with that.